In the fall of 1985, as the mushroom cloud of the AIDS crisis spread its deadly pallor over our city and nation, the members and friends of All Souls gathered to declare the moral equivalent of war on this fearsome and devastating disease. In his sermon on Sunday, September 29, 1985, Forrest Church admitted, "We know very little about the disease called AIDS. But," he continued, "we know a great deal about two other diseases that, on account of AIDS, are infecting millions of our fellow citizens. I'm speaking," he said, "of the plague of ignorance and the plague of fear. The plague of ignorance that is sweeping this country is intimately coupled with the plague of fear. And when the virus of fear infects our hearts, the first thing that it kills is the ability to love." In order to combat the ignorance and fear swirling within and around them, the congregation took action. In response to Jerry Falwell and other fundamentalist preachers who were proclaiming that AIDS was God's curse on homosexuals, the AIDS Task Force deployed a series of billboards on buses and in subway cars in New York City. One read, "AIDS is a human disease. It requires a humane response." Another instructed, "Treat people with AIDS with kindness. It won't kill you." Some politicians whipped up the public frenzy against AIDS victims by proposing that people with AIDS be quarantined behind barbed wire. Some schools insisted that children infected with HIV stay home. In response, the AIDS Task Force set up a program at St. Luke's Hospital that enabled members of All Souls to visit people who had been hospitalized by AIDS. Because of the hysteria, many AIDS patients had been virtually abandoned by their friends and effectively isolated from their families. People from All Souls kept vigil at their bedsides, helped them eat, kept them company. Another widespread belief during the time was that you could contract the AIDS virus by giving blood. In response, the AIDS Task Force sponsored programs in conjunction with the New York City Department of Health and the Gay Men's Health Crisis to educate people about how HIV spreads. They also conducted blood drives to demonstrate that donating blood is safe and a good way to help. Over the years, the AIDS Task Force has received countless accolades for their work in countering ignorance and combating fear of AIDS. Today, as we mark the 25th anniversary of this signal effort, we commend those whose courage and commitment made it possible. They waged the moral equivalent of war in the pursuit of healing and wholeness. They took risks, made sacrifices, and endured heavy losses. In so doing, they bore witness to their loyalty to our deepest values as a congregation and our highest aspirations as a nation. Upon what should we declare the moral equivalent of war in our time? Certainly, the scourge of HIV/AIDS remains virulent, especially in Africa. We help combat this scourge by supporting the work of the Unitarian Universalist Service Committee. And bigotry against gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgendered people remains potent, especially when it comes to the right to marry and certain other fundamental human rights. We help combat this bigotry by supporting the work of the Unitarian Universalist United Nations Office, as well as the UUA's Standing on the Side of Love campaign, which is doing for gay marriage what the AIDS Task Force at All Souls did for AIDS awareness. If you would ask me to identify the single most pervasive religious issue that today cries out for the declaration of the moral equivalent of war, I would say the increasingly pernicious influence of fundamentalism. In all its forms, Jewish, Christian, and Muslim, fundamentalism threatens at every turn the progress we call civilization. Armed with a supposedly divine revelation from a God who is belligerently male, and given covering fire by male Messiah figures and prophets and priests, fundamentalism subordinates women, vilifies gays, and repudiates science. It's difficult to know how to declare the moral equivalent of war on fundamentalism. Most champions of human rights today attacked fundamentalism on political grounds, based on the natural rights of individuals and the collective responsibility of societies. As Unitarian Universalists, I believe we have a unique angle of attack. We champion human rights on religious grounds, based on our gospel of utter dependence and our God of infinite possibility. Whatever else the experience might entail for those of us who fight this battle, it must conform, at least in part, to James's criteria: a risky, demanding, all-consuming experience that forges a bond of loyalty among people who pursue a common purpose. So what would boot camp in the moral equivalent of war on fundamentalism look like? Imagine that every couple of months, 24 members of All Souls, along with one of the ministers, would board a plane and fly somewhere in the world that needs a school. Education is the best antidote I know to the empire of ignorance known as fundamentalism. The group would stay for several weeks and build a school. The labor would be hard, the comforts few. Leisure time conversations among the members of the group would be purposeful, about the nature of faith and the importance of spiritual practice, about how to develop religious community and forge religious character. The group would return from Unitarian boot camp to All Souls, I believe, transformed. Fledgling veterans in the moral equivalent to the war on fundamentalism. Our purpose as individuals and our goal as a religious community is to wage the moral equivalent of war in the service of noble goals and worthy causes. It is to be disciplined and courageous, selfless and loyal, steadfast and unwavering. It is to fulfill our potential as members of this historic congregation, as citizens of this great nation, and as sons and daughters of the God who holds us all in a divine embrace. Amen. I love you. May God bless us all.